Just minutes after firing 2 fatal shots at the Virginia Tech dormitory on Monday, Cho Sung-wi returned to his own dorm room and made the final preparations to mail what appears to be a video confession.
When the time came, I did it. I had to.
It's unbelievable to me that their lives are gone. They've been snuffed out, and it's just devastating to me.
I kept saying to him, please go to counseling. I will take you over to counseling myself, because he was so depressed.
And I called and no cell phone was responding. But then when school called and said that my daughter has not been picked up from school, then I froze.
911, there was a shooting at Gateway where Gabrielle Gifford was. And I do believe Gabrielle Gifford was hit.
I was shot in the leg, actually in the inner thigh, and the other bullet went in my face. It missed the carotid artery by about 2 millimeters. Otherwise, I'd have been a goner, that's for sure.
There are about 4 million people in the United States with severe mental illness. Only about 40,000, or 1%, are dangerous. Too often, we are unable to identify who is dangerous, either to themselves or to others. The barriers to getting these people into care are among the most wrenching failures of our time.
And as soon as we opened the garage door, we saw a pipe coming from the car to the garage, and we knew, and he was in the back seat lane. He was dead.
My brother, Scott O'Brien, was 31 years old when he passed away at Milwaukee Mental Health Complex. My mom entered the depths of despair that I've never even believed could be humanly possible. On May 29th, she took her life.
Why didn't people around Song-Wi Cho or Jared Loughner do more to make sure they got care and that others around them were safe? Why couldn't Bob Graff or Christy Polk get help for their relatives before tragedy struck? The answer lies in a 40-year-old federal lawsuit by a teacher in West Allis, Wisconsin. She fought against being committed to a mental institution. Alberta Lessard is 91 years old and still lives in West Allis. Over the past 50 years, she's been arrested more than 50 times and taken to the Milwaukee County Mental Health Complex. Doctors there have declared her to be mentally ill, suffering from paranoid delusions. Lessard was an elementary school teacher for more than 30 years. She also taught at Marquette University, training teachers as reading specialists.
I had a boy who I now think it would have been like an autistic. He could talk, but nobody at the school thought he could because he never talked once at school. They passed him on to my room, and so I was almost a whole year fighting with that kid to get him to talk. I didn't think I was going to make it, but right toward the end, he talked like everything. He could read, he could write, he could do everything.
In the late 1960s, the West Allis School District adopted alternative teaching methods to teach reading. Lessard refused to use these methods, and she was fired from both West Allis schools and Marquette.
She was crushed. I mean, she lived, her life was dedicated to teaching, and her right to teach, or her ability to teach, had been taken from her.
The problem is that it's the elections that are corrupt, and if the people here don't do anything about it, they're going to get much worse.
Her behavior became erratic. She started showing up at school board meetings and the dean's office, demanding a hearing and refusing to leave. She called offices there repeatedly, sometimes 100 times a day. She began hearing voices, she believed that goons trained by Richard Nixon were coming after her. In a panic on the afternoon of October 29, 1971, Lessard scrambled out the window of her second-story apartment and dangled from the windowsill. Police came and arrested her. She was committed to the mental health complex.
The West Dallas police felt that this was very bizarre conduct. They didn't know how to deal with Alberta, so they said that that conduct was constituted an attempt to commit suicide, and on that basis, they took her to the mental health center, and she was committed. She asked me to come out and see her, and so I did. I remember it was a November day. I thought there were bats coming out of the place, and it was shocking. When I got inside, it was even more shocking. It was essentially, it was a jail. It wasn't a treatment facility. She very badly wanted to go home and was being held against her will. So I went back to my office and I read the law, and I couldn't really believe it. People could be committed indefinitely upon the signatures of 3 persons with no right to a hearing, no right. So if there's no right to a hearing, of course there's no right to a lawyer, there's no right to cross-examine, there's no right to do anything.
A few weeks later, Blondis and his associate Tom Dixon filed a lawsuit in federal court, not only asking for Lessard's release, but for the release of all who had been committed without benefit of a trial or the representation of a lawyer. They challenged Wisconsin's commitment law as unconstitutional. The old system, based on English common law, treated those with severe mental illness as children, and the state as the parent.
Well, Alberta Lessard was held at the mental institution for a long time before a hearing. I believe that was the basis of her case, and she certainly deserved to win it. I mean, I think that case changed the standard for the whole country for mental commitments.
In October 1972, the federal court ruled the procedure for committing people like Lessard was unconstitutional. It was a landmark decision that fundamentally changed mental health treatment and care in the United States. Unless those with mental illness were found to be in imminent danger to themselves or others beyond a reasonable doubt, they could not be forced to get treatment, even by family members.
Why can't you just put my loved one in the hospital?
Right.
He's sick. He's not thinking well. Put him in the hospital. And I have to explain, well, that's not how it is right now. People have rights, and we need to respect those rights.
First of all, the people who they say are being committed have to have hearings. They have to be heard. They need due process, and they need an attorney, or they need to be able to represent themselves.
She is kind of a poster child for the failure of the whole system. And I think whatever we can do to publicize that this is the outcome of a law which was passed in 1972, which has led to tragedy. And in a sense, she represents that.
Who is dangerous? The question of where to draw the line between public safety and personal liberty has been left to police and judges, not families and doctors. And police typically don't consider a person dangerous unless they are committing a threatening act or have already behaved violently. E. Fuller Torrey of the Treatment Advocacy Center blames the Lessard decision for tragedies like those at Virginia Tech and Tucson. After the Lessard decision, people who were ill but not obviously dangerous were released from institutions but not necessarily given adequate care in the community.
The people who came out in the first 10, 15 years were those who were the most functional. Many of them went to the nursing homes on it. They weren't on the streets generally. As you move down the chain, you get sicker and sicker people that you're locking out of the hospital. So the people that you're now locking out of the hospital, every time you close beds in the Milwaukee Asylum or in Madison or wherever, you are locking out sicker and sicker people. And therefore you're ending up with more Loeffners and the other people who are inevitably going to commit acts.
The problem with E. Fuller Torrey's approach is that it is so based on civil commitment, which by definition is an adversary model, that it never allows for a therapeutic alliance between the individual and the mental health professionals.
Civil libertarians like Thomas Zander argue that any kind of involuntary commitment denies a mental patient his or her rights.
It's always adversarial because the individual always knows that if he or she does not cooperate, that the mental health professional will turn into a police officer. So you always have this lack of trust between the treating professional and the individual. That's the E. Fuller Torrey approach, and it doesn't work.
Torrey's organization was founded in 1998 to call attention to the acts of violence committed by and against people with mental illness.
Clearly there was no one else, and still is nobody else, who is pushing on this end of it. And I've actually been very pleased with how much we've been able to do, even though it's still a drop in the bucket compared to what has to be done, of simply providing a pushback on the whole civil liberties argument that everyone should be able to walk around and be psychotic if they want to.
I'm saying everybody hates me from both sides. Those who want people committed and those who don't want people committed. They both hate me because they cannot get their way on what they want concerning mental commitment.
Yeah, I know. I forget your age.
Yes.
You've been around so long. And
Gonna take me for granted.
The debate plays out in families every day. Pat and John Spurl give a human face to the dilemma of how to deal with people with mental illness who may get in harm's way. John has suffered from schizophrenia for over 40 years. His mother, Pat, is frustrated that he hasn't been committed to an institution that can care for him, while John believes he should be free to make his own decisions.
One thing I wanted to say was we were looking for help for John when he was 8 years old. I mean, we knew by then, but so John was just born a little bit too early for awareness or public awareness of serious mental illness, and they certainly didn't recognize it in children. I think he was depressed when he was young.
my mental illness, if it is mental illness, stems from my own problems. It's not just black and white. I mean, I hear voices, yes, and I don't like the voices I hear. I don't have to deal with it, but I do.
We have to have facilities that a family can take a mentally, if they're terrified, they're locking their bedroom door or hoping someone won't, their child won't kill them. They see this behavior that's so scary. They have to have a place to go, an emergency psychiatric place. They need a place then to commit them. He had a probation officer, and I remember the probation officer committed him to the Child and Adolescent Treatment Center.
And then I had to be somewhere where I didn't want to be, and it was a horrible place. They locked you up at first, and there was all this food rubbed in these 6 screens, and ugly painting on the walls. The paint on the walls looked filthy, it looked ugly. And they had these little rooms, and I didn't have any possessions, and it was just like lifeless I was. A living hell.
I would also say, everybody should have their legal rights, but you are here terrified of the behavior of an adult child, and then they give him a lawyer who tells him what to do to get out of treatment within X number of hours, and you are in an adversarial position with your adult child. Who cares about him more than you do? I just kind of back away because
I can't help my own son. I feel like I can't even help anybody else, you know. John, did you say people can refuse their medicine if they go in?
Yeah, they have a right to refuse it.
Do you think that's good, if they need medicine?
I don't think anybody should be forced to do something against their own will, but I think they should be given a clear, definitive, you know, to describe to these people what the medicine will help them with, and tell them what it's good for and how it would help them.
Yeah, what if their brain doesn't work right? That's why they're in the hospital.
Well,
because they have a brain disorder.
It doesn't, you know, you can't take free will from a person. I mean, you can't force them to do something against their own will. And, you know, even if they are sick and maybe they're happy in their sickness, you never know, because maybe sometimes sickness is more fun than it is dangerous.
We're going to have to address all of these things, and maybe some, what they call their rights, might have to be taken. I just think the professionals in the mental health community also have to be honest about the percentage that are not recovering. And otherwise, I think it's deceptive and not really, as I say, it's not honest to pretend that people like John and I aren't here, our community, I know hundreds of people like myself. So it's nice to talk sweet talk about recovery, and I know many people can recover quite well, but it isn't everybody, and I wish the community would remember that.
Despite scientific advances in other areas of medicine, we have not gotten better at predicting who is or might become dangerous.
No one, including mental health professionals, have a crystal ball. We can't know who is going to be ultimately dangerous.
Experts have tried to use specific measures to determine dangerousness, such as a patient's treatment, family history, and alcohol and drug use.
But in most of the cases that have gotten a lot of news media coverage, those empirically based factors were not present and would not have allowed for a scientifically valid prediction of dangerousness.
Doctors say the best indication of future violence is a history of violence, but that provides little help in cases where someone who has never committed violence before slips into homicidal or suicidal thoughts.
Typically, prediction of dangerousness is only valid for individuals who have a documented history of past acts. And interestingly, that is what the Lessard court found to be the proper basis for a finding of dangerousness.
There is a stigma to mental illness. Many people don't know what it looks like, and the natural tendency is to turn away. But we ignore people with mental illness at our own peril.
There's this public belief that is reinforced that people with mental illness have a tendency to violence. It's really a stigma, and it's not justified by the facts. People with mental illness are 2.5 times more likely to be victims of assault or violence or rape than the general public. 90% of people with mental illness never commit a violent act. So it's clear that this myth or this belief that violence and mental health go hand in hand is just not true.
I learned that people do not treat it as illness, which it is. They do not treat it like cancer. People with a mental illness are treated like especially defective people. And that stigma is the toughest thing my son faced. And it was the hardest obstacle we had in our family to overcome.
Part of it's fear, I think. When somebody's falling down with clutching their chest, we're not afraid usually to approach them and try to help. But when it involves emotion that they're yelling out, the person, even though they are helpless, or maybe even feeling helpless, the person who has a mental illness that's with an exacerbation, they oftentimes don't come across that way. Yeah, and they may even show strong emotion, anger, and so forth that pushes people away further.
I think that the health of a community is dependent upon the individuals in that community being healthy. And I think that ignoring that, pretending that mental health is something that we can deal with sporadically or just once in a while is incredibly foolish. I think it leaves all of us very open to not just attack, but to sorrow.
Each year, there are roughly 20,000 homicides in the United States. About 1 in 12 are committed by people with untreated mental illness. That's according to the National Institute of Mental Health. When we fail to provide care for people with mental illness, many others pay the price. Sung-Wee Cho was a student at Virginia Tech who had been found to be dangerous. He was ordered by a judge to undergo psychiatric care, but Cho did not keep his appointment, and no one followed up to see that he did. On April 16, 2007, Cho killed 32 people and then himself on the campus of Virginia Tech. One of those killed that day was Jocelyn Couture Nowak, whose husband Jersey is a professor at the school.
And so I am here with our youngest daughter, and she was 12 when her mother was killed. And she was the only child who lost her mother. So we had to rebuild our everything, you know. We hardly knew each other because I just worked.
In 2008, the classrooms where the shootings occurred were converted to the Center for Peace Studies and Violence Prevention. Jersey Nowak became founding director.
My very first visit was before it was reconfigured, just regular classes, and the two police officers were assisting me. They're very gentle, and I just wanted to know what happened and where and which spaces, and they offered me to escort me back to my office. I said, no, I will go alone, and you know, it's just, it felt like I was walking on the moon. It was so important also for the victims and for the families and for the community that it's someone who was directly affected was here.
What could have prevented this? Lucinda Roy was Cho's academic advisor. She desperately tried to get him help, but university policies discouraged her from doing so.
Very often what students want more than anything, and that was what Sung-Wee Cho wanted to some extent, was someone to sit and actually listen to him. That's not to say that that was enough. Clearly it wasn't. He also was in desperate need of help. I think that one of the things that teachers and parents and others need to be able to do is to recognize when they're in deep water and they really need someone to come and help them to be able to communicate with a student who may be in trouble or a child who may be in trouble.
Classmates knew something was wrong with Jared Loughner. He blurted out obscenities in class and went on long, rambling discourses about the country's flawed currency system. In October 2010, Loughner was suspended from Pima County Community College until he could provide proof that he was getting mental health counseling. On the morning of January 8, 2011, Loughner arrived at the Safeway Mall in Tucson, where Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords was hosting a Congress on Your Corner forum.
The corner of my eye, I saw some guy come running in, and he instantly started shooting. He shot Gabby, he shot Ron, he shot Judge Roll, he shot, and then he started just, he turned and was firing out this way at, he was just waving his gun around, firing. He shot Gabe, killed Gabe instantly, very near me. And I saw Gabby get shot in the head. Then he ran, trying to get away towards Walgreens, and just shot people who were standing and sitting against the wall. There was shouting. I don't remember a lot of screaming. It was all over in somewhere between 20 and 30 seconds.
Ron Barber was standing next to Giffords when the shooting began.
I saw him out of the corner of my eye with a gun in his hand, leveled with two hands. And he went right up to the congresswoman very quickly and shot her in the head, and then he turned the gun on me, and behind me, Judge Roll, who was also killed. And then Gabe Zimmerman, our colleague who died right beside me. He fell beside me. At first, I didn't realize that I'd been shot. And then when I was lying on the ground and I saw the pool of blood, around me, I said to myself mentally, I've been shot. And what was really sort of just bizarre was not only was a pool of blood, but right in the middle of the pool of blood was a spent cartridge from the gun. So I realized what had happened. The scene was horrific, but there was a lot of heroism that day from just ordinary citizens. A woman who was going to the Safeway to shop came to my aid and crawled under a table to get to me and put her hands over the bleeding and basically stopped the bleeding until the paramedics got there. Had she not done that, I would have bled out in about 5 minutes. And she held that pressure for about 20 minutes while we were waiting for the paramedics to get in. I think that what we have to do is treat this as an issue of services and mental health treatment, not as an indictment of people with mental illness. I have no anger towards Gelofner, and maybe it'll come, but it certainly hasn't come yet. I certainly have a lot of empathy for his parents and what they're going through. And as far as he's concerned, I hope that he will not only get justice, but will get treatment that's obviously needed for him.
Ron Barber was shot twice and survived. Gabe Zimmerman was not as fortunate.
On the day of the shooting, I got a call from Kelly to the effect that Gabrielle had been shot. We couldn't find Gabe, and that's when it started to dawn on us that he was not in any of the emergency rooms. What we do take some comfort from is it appears he died very quickly and painlessly. He probably didn't know what happened. My first reaction is, okay, I just want to get through the next 30 years or whatever it is my life is and get this over with. I don't like this. Gabe and I had talked about how unpleasant it would be for a child to die before a parent, but it never occurred to us that it happened to us. This hurts a lot, but you got to start talking to people about Gabe. That's really important.
It's like something not a lot of people go through, and so like a lot of people can't relate to it because it's like she would have her good days and her bad days.
People who have mental illness don't suffer alone. Shayna Franzen was 10 years old when she realized her mother had a severe chronic mental illness. Her mom began hallucinating and acting irrational.
Like, for instance, she would say that our neighbors downstairs were burning people and we had to get out of there. And she then drove me to a hotel and we stayed there for a couple hours while she kind of just sat there and like talked to herself and then came back home. I didn't really understand exactly what was going on, so I didn't really like know who to talk to, except for her therapist that she would go see, and he would try and talk to me about it, but I didn't really understand what was going on. When I was older and realized more what was going on, I would have to do things like make sure that while she was in the hospital that the rent was getting paid. There would be times where I would wish that I was like living with someone else, like that was like more of like a mom, but like at the same time I would just deal with it, I guess. So I've suffered a lot because I've had to grow up really fast, and I've been through a lot in 3 years, and a lot of people have been in their life. I've had to go through a lot of things, from like, paying the rent to having to get rid of almost everything in our house to having to find a temporary home for my cats and like all this other stuff. I've had to like do a lot just during high school that most people never can imagine going through.
Of the 35,600 Americans who kill themselves each year, About 6,000 had untreated mental illness. Bob Graff tried for years to keep his son Peter safe, urging him to take his medication.
Well, my journey into this area, this sickness, mental health began when my son got sick in college. And I treated it just like everybody else in the beginning is, he was taking drugs or alcohol. I didn't understand even anything about it. When you're depressed, you just want to go into a nothing land, And so he was so sad. It was so hard for him to do things, to move and do things. And it just became, less and less social, more and more isolated, even from us. He tried a little bit to get out of it. His big idea was if he could leave the city. After he died, and we called our pastor over at the house, and he came over and he knew a little bit of the story, and he said, well, Peter made it to Chicago, because that was his way out of the pain and suffering that he had.
For years, Christy Polk's family tried to get her brother Scott O'Brien help. Still, he committed suicide. A few years later, their mother, Carol O'Brien, racked with guilt, also killed herself.
In my brother and mother's case, their minds were not well enough to recognize that they were a danger to themselves. There's huge what-ifs every day. And with those what-ifs comes great guilt, like it was up to me to take care of them and save them. I have come to terms for my own mental health that if I could have saved them, I would have saved them. If it was up to me, they would still be here. I didn't have the power. Love did all it could do. I was praying and hoping and begging and pleading with the system to keep them safe. But for how long, I don't know. Their mental illnesses were terminal. I was shoved aside because I was not the one who was ill, and they were considered adults. I had very little power in the situation.
So the real frustration of not being able to say, my brother needs this, my mother needs this, you were treated
like a nobody.
Like a nobody.
The problem with leaving it up to a person to decide if he wants psychiatric care is that not everyone with mental illness knows they have it. One of the hallmarks of some forms of mental illness is the inability to appreciate that you are sick.
It's hard for me to accept the fact to be labeled mentally ill, but because I feel like, well, who am I fooling? Because I'm on disability, and I don't want to take money, but I do because I don't feel I could hold a job, and I don't know if that's due to mental illness or not.
Each time I would get out there, then I would be released because I'm not mentally ill and because I can write such high scores, get such high scores on tests. I had a perfect score, which they said would put me in the category of a genius. Now, I'm not saying that I am. They're saying this because I never thought I was. You get it? I still don't.
The National Institute of Mental Health estimates there are 3.6 million Americans today over the age of 18 with severe mental illness that is not being treated. Of those, 200,000 are homeless and 319,000 are in jails or prisons.
I think many times the mentally ill in our jails is such a failure of the public mental health system and a failure of society. We Americans get upset about political prisoners. Yeah, we have a system that promotes that very thing here in the United States. It's worse than being a political prisoner because you're being jailed for an illness.
Only 12% of those with diagnosable psychiatric disorders receive minimally adequate treatment.
The good news is it's all fixable. We don't need a huge amount of intensive research to know how to have an impact on the out-of-control failures of mental health.
There are a myriad of options ranging from least to most restrictive. Among the least restrictive is crisis intervention training, also known as CIT.
The point of CIT training is to help police officers and respondents deal with mental health crises in the most compassionate manner possible. It often means de-escalating the situation where someone is really agitated. It means trying to get them to divert them from jail and divert them from the hospital even, to use other community resources.
The first crisis intervention training we did, almost every cop in the place was made to go. They didn't want to be there. Yeah, I'm a cop. Yeah, I'm not a social worker, and I don't believe in hug-a-thug programs anyway. By the end of the week, they were all loving it. In fact, the police chief, here is the first police chief in a big city, is requiring the 40-hour training for all his cops. I believe Santa Fe's kept statistics, and they've had a reduction of SWAT team call-outs. So the more officers they have trained, the less SWAT they have to call out because they're de-escalating things and they're not making things worse.
Some people point to the need to build strong patient-doctor relationships.
What we need is more community-based care that is based on a recovery model and is based on a client-centered approach that encourages alliances between the individual and the treatment provider, so that when the individual starts feeling alienated from society and starts ruminating about things that he or she might do to others, the treatment professional has an idea of what's going on because this therapeutic alliance has been formed.
It doesn't take neurologists on every street corner. It often takes something as basic as having a case manager who does routine home visits and helps you pay your bills and helps you apply for benefits and helps you navigate the challenges of community living.
Another option is to forge an agreement with a person who has mental illness, where he authorizes care when his condition deteriorates. Laws permitting these agreements vary from state to state. They are known as psychiatric advance directives or Ulysses contracts.
It's not really a contract, it really is an advance directive. Just like you might have a power of attorney for health care for your regular medical care, but this is specific to psychiatric illness. And so you might say, appoint someone as your power of attorney for your mental health care. Somebody can say, look, when I start heading down that road where it looks like I'm going to have a relapse, I want you to intervene early and get me stabilized on my meds, do what you have to do, whether it's an outpatient commitment or take me in to get me seen, before I reach this level of dangerousness or things like that. So it's an attempt to, really twofold, prevent the negative consequences, the horrible, horrible, devastating effects that mental illnesses have on people. And two, it really, going back to the notion of liberty, it's respecting the liberty of people with mental illnesses.
In cases where the patients need more supervision, there is the choice of outpatient commitment. The patient knows he or she will be hospitalized if they do not comply with treatment.
Virtually every study that's been done on outpatient commitment shows that it works. And the data, we got more studies coming, but the data is quite clear. The outpatient commitment has clearly shown a marked decrease in hospitalization. It has shown a decrease in homelessness. It's shown a decrease in violence. It's shown a marked decrease in jailings on it.
Others point out that some patients are so sick, hospitalization is the only effective option. In those cases, they say, we need to provide more beds in institutions to make sure these people can be helped. The number of beds dropped dramatically in the wake of the Lessard case.
When somebody is presenting themselves and saying, I believe I need inpatient treatment, and the reason they're not receiving it isn't because they're not eligible medically, they are. Frequently, they don't get in because we don't have enough inpatient resources, and the hospital's already full.
Tragedies like those at Virginia Tech and Tucson lend an urgency to the need to get help for the sickest and most dangerous. But calls for reform often fade once the headlines disappear, and the underlying challenges remain. Decisions that once belonged to families and doctors now involve the police and courts. Finding a solution will require everyone to work together.
There's no one silver bullet for every patient. Outpatient civil commitment might work for some patients. Psychiatric advance directives might work for others. And there are still some patients who require inpatient treatment. Some may have such severe psychosis that they might never be released.
I've been on a bit of a crusade since the shooting to try to get those ideas across to the general public. In fact, if people had been more conscious and aware of what was going on with Jared Loeffner, maybe he would have gotten treatment. We just want to make sure that more people know about what to do.
What really has to occur is sort of the political will to stand back, and whether you do it for human reasons because it's the moral thing to do, or whether you do it for fiscal reasons because it's a waste of money, the important thing is that we do it.